Welcome to the Station Wagon. I'm the older brother, Mark.
And I'm little sister, Julie. This is the podcast where my brother and I give up something we take for granted and tell you how it goes.
Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Hi, everyone. I gave my coworker Mary some cookies, and then Mary told me that Mary does not like cookies, that Mary does not bake.
What is going on here?
We are going to be giving up gendered pronouns, so that was my special way of introducing it.
That was very special and awesome. And we're like real podcasters who do intros.
We're just like it.
Listeners, if you have ideas of things we might be taking for granted, please send your suggestions to wagonpodcast@gmail.com. Shout out to us on Twitter. We're at wagonpod. Or you could connect with us on Facebook, just like the fabulous Rebecca Shapiro did. So, Mark, what is a gendered pronoun?
Well, first of all, so-called Julie, imagine a beautiful Venn diagram, because we actually have two definitions that are going to overlap for our work here. So first of all, we have a pronoun, right? And it's any member of a small class of words that are used as replacements or substitutes for nouns and noun phrases such as I, you, he, this, who, and what. Okay. So that makes sense.
So it's like in a sentence, if you wanted to say, oh, look at that cool book. It sure looks neat. Then you're replacing book with it. It is the pronoun.
Very good. Or if you wanted to say, my sister is ugly, I could then say, she certainly is.
Did you hear that silence?
I did hear that silence.
Okay, please continue.
Gendered is a characteristic of, suited to, or biased towards one gender or another, but it's also the application of that bias towards some object. So in many languages, there are ways to refer to objects by gender.
Like she referring to a boat or a car?
More like in Spanish language, certain objects are either masculine or feminine.
El pájaro.
Thank you very much for that. What was that?
The bird.
Very good. Thank you.
All birds are boys in Spanish.
Is that right?
No, I mean, they're not. It's just...
The bird is a masculine word?
Right, yeah.
Not that all birds are in Spain are males?
Right, exactly.
Okay, just as long as we're clear about that.
It's the huge mystery of the animal kingdom.
In our case, we're putting those two things together in this nice Venn diagram because there are pronouns that are not gendered, such as this or what, but we are going to be talking about the pronouns that are gendered that refer to the gender of a person, such as he, she, her, his, etc.
Okie dokie.
Let me give you the quiz.
Oh, yeah, give me a quiz.
Give you the quiz. All right. How many pronouns are there in the English language?
Okay, so you mean like if...
Okay, so let me make it simpler for you. If you were to count up all the pronouns in the English language, how many would there be?
8.
Oh, I'm sorry. Answer A would be 4. B is 131. And C is 77. You were just so, Johnny on the spot. I forgot to give you the multiple choices. And
77.
listeners who are playing at home, I apologize.
77.
That's correct.
Yes.
Good job. How many gendered pronouns will we be giving up? And here's your choices. 6, 8, or 13?
I guess 6. I can't think of any more than that.
It's 8.
Oh, wow.
And they are he, her, hers, herself, him, himself, his, and she.
Okay, yep.
And which one of these rankles me the most? A, using the option of his or her, in quotes, when writing or talking instead of just using his or just using her.
Okay.
B, using they or their to describe a singular person's actions or ownership. So like an example would be, Shira is smart. Their IQ is 2010.
Yeah.
Tova is strong. They can lift 5 million pounds.
Yeah.
Or letter C, considering the pronoun he to be gender neutral.
For me, it's definitely B, using their for singular.
Really?
Yeah, that drives me insane. That's my big thing with this whole topic, is that I just don't like when people use they for singular. But I also recognize that there and they is a common accepted gender neutral term, and I just need to suck it up and get over it.
Wow. That couldn't be further from the truth.
What? What's your thing?
Well, you know what? I won't deny you your own opinion, but my thing is considering the pronoun he to be gender neutral.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's really based on a history of male-dominated society that causes he to be thought of as the default.
It's like it's so old-fashioned.
To say he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That when I do hear that, it's just like, ugh.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that he thing in the history section. Shall we move into history?
Let's do that. And I'm going
Right.
to talk about it in the science section.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
The section everyone really likes.
And I'm going to be talking just about English, okay, because that is supposedly the language that I speak.
Yeah.
So, up to the 700s, when we're talking about Old English, we had grammatical gender for inanimate objects. So kind of like we were talking about with Spanish or other languages nowadays, you would identify objects as being masculine or feminine.
Huh, I did not realize that.
So in the 1200s, also in Old English, you see the grammatical gender for inanimate objects disappearing. And this was really due to so many more languages being spoken in Europe than there used to be, that every inanimate object began to have multiple gender definitions depending on which language you were speaking, and it got to be too confusing.
Oh, so it was really an effort to kind of simplify.
Right.
They needed a content management system like Drupal.
Right. Can we think of a middle-aged version of Drupal?
Ye old Drupal.
That was really awful. And please don't say that ever again. In about the 1300s, Middle English came around and started using the genderal.
Genderal.
The genderal. That's a new thing. I coined that. Middle English. We're looking for sponsors. 1300s, Middle English came around and people started using the gender neutral pronoun a, just the letter A. So it's not like we think of the word a like I have a beer or I have a honey badger.
Those were the only two nouns you could think of, beer and honey badger.
They go so well together, wouldn't you agree?
Fair enough.
All right, thank you. It was actually used instead of saying something like he or she, but in Middle English.
Wow.
So A came from the Middle English for he, and I'm going to mispronounce this, but H-E-O, like heo, which was used for a female. And these both derive from Old English, and the way they're pronounced, they became nearly indistinguishable from each other. And they were reduced to a very short syllable.
And people probably weren't writing all the time, like the
No,
masses.
it was probably very illiterate era. Yes, exactly.
If you're just pronouncing something and the words start to blend together, then, the words
Right.
just kind of become the same thing.
It caused a problem that's opposite of what we're trying to do now, which is identify genders.
Oh, okay.
They, unfortunately, that development made it so that it was very difficult to identify the gender of the person you're talking about.
So if you were doing your mail order bride or groom registry, then there could be
Yes.
some funny mistakes. Did that word become our word, A?
No.
Okay.
No, it died away. All right, 1745, the very first grammarian to propose he as a default for both genders was in Anne Fisher's A New Grammar. So it was a woman grammarian who proposed it in her book. People were using it that way, but this was the very first time a grammarian actually wrote it down.
Interesting.
So for hundreds of years, people have been trying to get away from gender.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought that was totally a modern thing.
Using that A from the Middle English. That was at least like 25 years ago.
But I thought that was just kind of accidental, not so much a purposeful, you know what, guys, let's
Well,
get rid
it
of
was
this
a reaction. Remember, it was a reaction to the overcomplexity of trying to gender all of the objects around folks.
Okay, so I guess the reasoning might be different.
Right.
It was like, hey, this talking stuff is way too hard. Whereas nowadays we're like, let's look at the effects of using gendered language.
Right. This is interesting quote. Like most efforts at language reform, these well-intended suggestions have been largely ignored by the general English-speaking public, which is interesting, Julie, because you really didn't even know that this was happening for more than 100 years in modern English, and you won't have heard of these things, I don't think. I know I didn't know what these were either. They're weird. This one author referenced this idea of inventing these non-gendered pronouns as an ongoing exercise in futility. Which is really interesting. I mean, it's very biting. Okay, so 1850, the word hisser.
Wow.
1884, thon and himmer. And you can kind of see they were trying to blend like his and her or him and her. 1927, hisser. 1935, him or her, but it's all one word.
Haha.
1972, shim, shims, and shimself.
I shouldn't laugh, but it's really funny.
No, laugh. I think it's really interesting. I mean, ha ha ha, those silly 1972 people. Shimself? I mean, it just sounds wrong. No wonder it wasn't picked up. 1974, her or his, one word. 1981, he, she. 1985, herm, which is also interesting because I'm quite sure that that's the sound that the non-playing characters from Minecraft make when you talk to them. They go, herm. August 2015, the University of Tennessee at Knoxville did something awesome. The Office for Diversity and Inclusion is asking students and faculty to use a certain list of pronouns in order to create a more inclusive campus, but it's very similar to these ones that have been invented in the last 100 years. And then in September 2015, again, the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, under orders by the head of the University of Tennessee school system, removed from its website that guide to pronouns.
Was that was because of like local political pressure, right?
Correct, exactly right.
So what happened? Were people like, hey, you can't make us do that weird thing?
Yeah, pretty much. Yep.
Okay.
You can't make us do that weird thing. And the Office for Diversity and Inclusion had started this up to help transgendered people feel not disassociated, because people think that just saying his or her covers everybody.
Right, right.
But the mixture of gender and sex in words is a complexity that now we are learning to work with more and more. And we need to be sure that our wording and how we speak is inclusive and makes sense.
And one thing I think we want to emphasize for our listeners is that we're not trying to force everyone into one specific language style. And our choice of doing this topic, this episode, is not to say this is the right way to do it and should all do this.
Right.
Just like we don't want everyone to give up sitting like we did for our first episode.
But we do want everybody to give up using eating utensils like we did in the third episode, right?
Forks are just disgusting.
Oh, awful practice.
I mean, our goal really is to, like every episode, is to gain appreciation for something we take for granted, which is how much gender-specific language we use on a daily basis.
Right.
If I can move on to the science stuff.
No, you may not.
Oh, you had more?
I have one more piece of history.
Please, please.
And thank you for that anti-political diatribe.
You're welcome.
October 2015, so just a month after Tennessee took down their post, Tulane University is offering students the chance to provide a preferred first name and gender pronoun by which they would like to be identified.
Oh, cool.
And it's intended to support transgender and international students, as well as those who do not go by their legal first name as listed in the student information system.
And then it's not forcing everyone to obey this new language style. It's just, hey, clear, those who want to will respect it.
Well, right. And to be clear, University of Tennessee wasn't forcing anybody to do anything.
Oh, I thought you said everyone had to use the non-gender.
No. They had these guidelines, and they were asking students and faculty to use the pronouns, but it wasn't forcing anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Important clarification.
Julie.
Yes.
Do you have science-y stuff for us?
No. I have a little bit of sciencey stuff, but this one was hard. I
have one thing to say.
I do have some sciencey stuff, of course, but I have fewer peer-reviewed research articles on this specific topic than I usually do, in part because it's a burgeoning new area.
Wait a minute. We just discovered that it's hundreds of years old. What part of the area is burgeoning?
I'm ignoring everything you said. I was just playing a video game during that. I did find some good literature about use of gendered language in general, like boats being called she, that kind of thing. But in terms of just the pronouns, most of the research right now really focuses on it as an issue related to helping empower transgender individuals.
Oh, wait, are you going to tell us about why boats are called she? Because I've always wondered that.
Because they're awesome.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
So some of the reasons that were identified in the literature of why it's important is it's important to recognize that gender is not binary. People oftentimes are not just male or female. And by using just the binary he, she, it kind of forces us into that distinction. Also, a different language alternative can be potentially helpful when a transgender individual is in the midst of transitioning from one gender to another or before transitioning. Also, it's a clear linguistic marker, that means a sign you give by talking, of a safe person. For example, the research I read shows that professors who use these alternative pronouns or avoid using the he that rankles Mark, that's a marker to their students that, hey, if you need to come talk to somebody, I'm a safe person.
If you're transgendered?
If you're transgender.
But if you're like a big-time macho guy like me, a professor who uses he all the time would feel safe to me.
Also, it's important for cisgendered people, which means non-transgendered folks.
So cisgendered means people who identify sexually based on the body that they're in? What's a better way to say that?
Yeah, I guess. So you don't want to just say biological male or biological female, because if a transgender individual has an operation to make themselves biological male or biological female, then they are now biological male or female. Whereas cisgender implies that you were born with the body that you identify with. So you and I are both cisgender.
You identify with. Okay, so I was born with a male body and I identify as male.
Listen, listeners, we are trying really hard. I know we're going to screw something up. Feel free to write your letters. Attention, Mark.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
There you go.
Okay, good.
But from my personal knowledge, most of the transgender individuals I know would rather use the gender-specific pronoun that they identify with rather than use a third alternative pronoun. You know, it's such a struggle to be transgender and then to finally transition for those who've been able to do that. You've worked for decades to become he or she. You want to be called he or she, not himmer or whatever it was. So, and again, I'm sure there's some people that doesn't fit. I just don't want to perpetuate a stereotype that all transgender people want this third pronoun. I don't think that's true.
What kind of stereotype do you want to propose?
That everyone named Julie is freaking awesome. What? Another downside of the... I only found one really good study in Sweden. A recent study looked at the last 4 years of their new gender pronoun, hen, which is a combination of he and she pronouns, which I forget the Swedish for.
Wait, you mean they just invented a new, okay, so like all the pronouns that I just went over from English, they just invented a new gender neutral pronoun.
Exactly. It seems like it's mostly within university settings, just like similarly to the United States, the source of progress. And what they found was, at first, the majority of Swedes who were interviewed thought that it was ridiculous and distasteful and felt, the same. It reminded me of the conversations about political correctness in the early 90s. Of, why are you forcing us to change the way we talk? Get over it, that kind of thing.
Right.
But in just 4 years, the attitudes did start to shift. But the most important thing about the study is that the attitudes changed faster than behavior. So in other words, 4 years later, when they surveyed individuals, the Swedes that they surveyed did seem to have less negative connotations of this new pronoun, but they didn't use it as much, attitude change takes a while. But behavior change takes a very, very long time, especially something like language.
Did you happen to read in that research if, the lack of adoption that you're describing now is going to shunt the new word hen over to the sidelines? Kind of the way I described the effort to invent new pronouns that are gender neutral as being futile?
I don't know. It'll be interesting. It's not very much like psychologists to make predictions.
Do you think we'll see that at the local IKEA?
The hen coing chair.
Oh, awesome.
Gender neutral and gendered language, like you were referring to before, of saying the person who enters this office, he should take off his shoes. That kind of language.
Yeah.
It has an effect not just on our trans community, but on the cisgendered people as well. There was a study of job interview candidates. It was a mock job interview when they read about candidates using that kind of language. Like, the candidate for this job shall have proficient use of Microsoft Word. He shall be able to create access databases, that kind of thing. The female candidates had lower self-efficacy. They had less belief that they could actually achieve success at that job. There's also some evidence that there's a correlation. See, notice how delicately I'm putting this, because this is tricky. There's some evidence that there's a correlation between countries with gendered language like Hebrew and Spanish, where you use male and female pronouns for nouns, not just people, that there's a correlation between that kind of gendered language and sexism. Now, this isn't one-to-one, of course, but does appear to be a correlation there. Adoption of gender-neutral language in other European countries also seems to be impeded by sexism. So countries that tend to be more sexist, that have other markers of sexism, show less willingness to address these kinds of language changes. And this makes sense.
Can you give us an example of a country like that?
Yes. United Kingdom, France, Switzerland. In those countries, the individuals who indicated higher rates of sexism, of course, were much less willing to talk about less use of the rankling he. And that totally makes sense, of course. But the underlying message being, we can't just start changing language and making that a norm. We really need to address the underlying sexism before we could expect this broad behavior change.
So wait, are you saying that Switzerland has a high level of sexism?
No, I'm not. Thank you for clarifying that. The individuals in these European countries, like the UK and France and Switzerland, that's where these studies happened. The individuals who are more sexist are less likely to make changes to their language.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah,
obviously. It's
totally
like,
makes sense.
Duh. Of course.
You should totally be a researcher, Mark. You would make mincemeat out of the analysis section.
Thank you.
Overall, the science says that this is new. Don't expect miracle changes based on our 2 weeks here. That it's going to be hard. People will not understand it. And also, Mark, I think you should brace yourself for some conversations with people who might get angry with us for wanting to know and might make that assumption, oh, you think we should all do this? And you know, have those conversations that harken back to the early 90s growing up in Indiana.
Interesting. Assuming we approach this as something more than just we thought of a new idea that is annoying.
You mean we, Rebecca, did?
Correct. We meaning Rebecca.
Okay, fair enough.
Not,
yeah, I mean,
right?
how we explain it.
Yeah, so are we ready to move on to what we're actually doing?
Let's do that.
Because this is a good segue. So, yeah,
Great segue.
We meaning Rebecca, and what we thought of for this, you know, if we're just approaching it from, hey, you know, we're doing this interesting thing versus, hey, we have a political stance, we're trying to move forward.
Good point. Okay.
So how are you approaching this? That you have a political stance?
No, I'm approaching, I mean, I do many political
are you going to burn your
stances.
bra too? So in addition to, we're not going to be moving forward a political agenda here.
Yes.
I'd be willing to engage people in the conversation, of course, if it comes up. I'm not going to say, no, don't talk to me about that.
No, I'm fascinated to hear it.
Person. So we're going to give up third-person gender-specific pronouns in our speech, but not in our email or other writing.
So why not email and other writing?
Well, because
we want to keep jobs?
Yes, that's pretty much it. We want to keep jobs. So what about email for personal use? I think we could give it up.
Yeah, I think so, too.
And everybody thinks that this is going to be super, super easy.
This one?
Yeah.
So what do you think about also giving up other forms of gendered language? Like words like mankind.
Mankind isn't a pronoun. And
I know,
this is
that's
all
why
about
I'm
giving up
talking
pronouns.
Well,
So, you know, maybe that'll be another episode.
Just consider how
No,
cool...
shut your cake hole.
We could
wait. Because shut your cake hole.
Mom, are you listening to that?
Is that what you're going to revert to? Come on.
Ladies
Come
and
on.
gentlemen, man up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mankind.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I understand that these are words that are gendered. Yes, I get it. But that literally is not the scope of this. Now, you're a program manager of some kind. Granted, you work for the Fed, you work for the government, so maybe you don't have a lot of rigor, but in corporate life, we have something called scope creep, Julie. Ever heard of it?
I know you have scope creep. Booyakasha.
Oh, God.
Boom shanka.
Boom shanka.
Okay. So just the pronouns. Okay,
Yes.
What about using their for singular?
I don't care how you get around the task. For instance, in our episode about being fancy or sitting, I don't care how you stood, just that you did it.
So there is analogous to squatting.
Maybe in your book.
Okay. So what do you think is going to be hardest for you?
Talking will be hardest for me.
It's already pretty challenging for you. So
thank you. Yes, that's true.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break, a 2-week break in actuality, while you listen to the Pleasure Kills. And when we come back, we will fill you in on our success.
When you use kind of they and them all the time, that is also really hard. And I've tried it a little bit. You just end up having to use people's names constantly, and you just skip out the pronouns. And what a pain in the butt.
So here's my deal on they as a singular pronoun. It's a commonly held misconception that it's making up new rules for grammar. It's been in usage for hundreds of years and is used in the writing of many respected authors, including Chaucer, Shakespeare, and Austen. Thank you, Wikipedia. It's an awesome tool to help people who don't necessarily feel like they fit into the sexist, essentialist, gender binary culture that we are all operating in. I know many folks, especially younger but not exclusively, who prefer a singular they, possibly because they don't identify as an either-or point on a binary scale of gender. It's also great to use when you don't really know what pronoun the particular person identifies with, because it's not particularly presumptive. You can just call anybody they, even with people who may not necessarily appear trans or gender nonconforming, that are looking for an option that doesn't perpetuate this essentialist language that goes along with having to be either male or female.
I like it the way we did in the old days, when it was nice and sexist, and all unknown gender pronouns were he, and we just coped with it. And very, very feminist, sensible women could understand that could be generic, but maybe I'm just very retrograde. I don't know.
Thank you, Barbara, Ari, and Dr. B.
Well, hey, Julie, welcome back.
Hey, Mark, how did it go?
It was a long 2 weeks, let me tell you. I did not like doing this one bit.
It was a total failure for me. I really liked doing it when I remembered.
I'm trying to recast this as not being a failed experiment, but being an experiment.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely learned a lot in the last 2 weeks.
Right, exactly. Like what?
I learned that this is really, really hard.
Right.
Which shows just how hard it must be for individuals who are trying to change any kind of language, really. Language just takes forever to change, especially if you're the only one doing it. Language is a societal change. And so us just doing this kind of in a vacuum, except when we talk to each other, was really difficult.
It was hard. So do you have any specific examples of?
Yeah. My biggest experience was I just kept forgetting. Yeah. And I wanted to write it all over my hands, but we had VIPs visiting work, so that wasn't going to happen. I started wearing bracelets and things that I don't normally wear to try to remind me. Didn't work at all.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, I had the same exact experience.
Yeah. The one time that I was predictably able to go without the gendered pronouns was at night telling my kids bedtime stories. And in part, it's because my kids knew I was doing this challenge and they like to support. Hi, kids. Thank you. But what I would do is tell them stories and make up.
Kids were looking for sponsorship.
Oh man, and make up names like they help me make up the names of the characters in the story, and like doorknob
Aw.
and light bulb.
Because light bulb and doorknob are certainly not gendered.
Exactly, and toilet paper, and so I would tell the story about these characters, and
That's great.
And then because I never in my own brain assigned the characters a gender or a sex, it was really easy to stick with the non-gendered pronouns because I didn't even have a gender assigned to them.
Cool. Interesting.
But in general language, when I knew the gender or I assumed the gender of an individual, it was extremely difficult to not state he or she. I just completely forgot unless I was very, very deliberately trying to do it.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I would just forget. And then the people I was talking with, because they knew I was doing the podcast, they all jumped right in and said, hey, you just said her or she.
Right.
And then I would repeat it in a way that didn't use those pronouns to get it out. When I would remember, my speech came out really slow and deliberate and thoughtful and
That's not
sounding
bad.
really stilted.
Oh, that's
Like,
bad.
and as I was speaking, I just could not imagine that the person I was talking to understood what I was saying.
Okay, so one thing is that I've gotten over my dislike of using they and their for the singular.
Do tell.
That was it.
Oh, give me an example.
So last time I indicated that
Did you indicate?
I reported.
You reported?
I stated.
Did you
that-
state? Did you just say it? Maybe you just said it into the podcast.
I said it. I didn't spray it.
You can't tell if
I
I'm
stated
spraying
it.
it.
I can tell, dude.
Sibilance.
That using they and their for singular bothered me just because of the grammatical aspect of it. But I've, over the last couple weeks, really realized that I don't get to decide, for everybody else in the world. From the interviews we just played, Ari's interview I thought was just fantastic. And he points out that they has been used
Wait,
for...
you just said he. I thought we were doing this podcast. Okay. It's
You're
all
right.
The tape is still going.
Okay. Ari indicated and stated, and Ari did not spray, that they has been used for singular for quite some time, and Ari gave plenty of examples too, and that it's useful. And the other two who I interviewed, it made it sound, or one of them, Barbara, said it's a pain in the butt, and it is. Barbara also indicated that it was uncomfortable for Barbara, and yeah, it might be, but I think Barbara would admit too. We still just
you know
kind of
what?
Suck it up.
You know what? This is so annoying to listen to. I think you got to totally leave it in. It's going to be awesome, Julie. Julie, listening to you speak this way without the gendered pronouns, we should now put gendered pronouns back into our speech, because that is literally not literally, it's metaphorically like watching people play Twister. It's like verbal Twister. Like you're trying to get around what you're actually trying to say.
Yeah. And what I was saying wasn't even that interesting to begin with, but it became even less interesting because of the verbal gymnastics.
Now, to be fair, you were talking about what our wonderful interviewees had said, so it's incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my experience was basically like I could not remember to keep the gendered pronouns out of my speech. And it just made me realize a couple things. One is that they're just part of our language DNA. And I'm not using that lightly. I really mean that they're an inextricable part of how our language has evolved. As we talked about in the first part of this episode, the history of the gendered pronouns. I mean, there has been evolution of these things over time. And now they are just so part of the language that you can't take them out without destroying the language itself. As we just witnessed from the little example you just gave us, right?
Massacring language.
Right.
But
it destroys the language not to have these basic things in it.
I would argue it doesn't destroy it, but to replace it with other pronouns, and instead of just saying Barbara, 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 Barbara over and over again, replacing it with hen or they, it will take decades.
Right.
I don't think that's destroying the language. I do think pronouns are really, really necessary,
Right.
but if we want to go without the gendered pronouns, it's going to take a while.
Okay, I agree with you. And it's not just going to take a while. It's not just time, Julie. I mean, you're not just saying it's time. You're probably also realize that it would be a complete cultural shift.
Totally.
Everything from, the little board books that we get for our pre-readers to, every part of grammar, and every school across the whole country would have to start doing this to change any part of these pronouns. And that, again, I mean, goes back to like my point about why I think this is why this is the language DNA, because I think it would take such a monumental paradigm shift to get there to be change.
I think that kind of change can happen a lot faster than it has in decades past. Consider the term on fleek. Do you know what that is?
I do not, but do you need a tissue?
No. On fleek, word or phrase that someone used in a viral video a few months ago. She made a video of herself saying, "Check out my eyebrows, they're on fleek." And the internet was taken by storm. And now on fleek is, and this is this year, and now on fleek is used to describe anything that's really stylish or just looking really spot on awesome.
Huh.
Language in the day of the internet can change pretty quickly.
So what was the reaction from other people when you were talking to them?
I kept forgetting, so very little.
So, Julie, we have an idea that came from Noah Kin.
Oh, yeah. I think he recommended one of our earlier podcasts.
Right. And so Noah is very prolific in terms of his recommendations.
Very creative.
Very creative. This one is actually only using the bathroom outside. I think he means like only going number 1 and number 2, maybe number 3. If you've seen Home, you know what I'm talking about. Going outside.
This...
Now, could we use a chemical toilet outside? Like if we had one? Because we actually own one of those.
I think that would count as being outside, as long as like there's no roof.
Right. If there's no roof, right? You're not protected from, yeah.
So put up a cubicle.
Yeah. So what do you think? What's your gut reaction to it?
In summertime, if I had a place to toilet that was far from my house. Oh, what about at work? Yeah.
Well, we wouldn't do anything that puts our job in jeopardy.
Would we just like wear diapers during?
No, we would just be normal workers.
Normal workers with normal toileting behaviors.
Exactly right.
I would consider this one in summer. What about you?
Yeah, I might consider it in summer too. I would definitely. It is on my list of things that I would definitely think about later to consider.
Listeners, let us know what you think on Facebook or Twitter. We're at WagonPod.
Go to wagonpod.com where you can listen, view show notes, and subscribe to the podcast. And you'll see buttons there to subscribe via iTunes or Android or whatever device you have.
iTunes isn't a device. Also, we also want to say thank you, as always, to the Pleasure Kills for the song Modern Problems.
Thank you, Pleasure Kills.
And thank you to Scrabble Champ 4 for the awesome, sweet iTunes review.
Yay, thank you.
Very helpful.
Super helpful.
Yeah, it helps others listen to the show, not just people we've pressured into it.
Oh my God. People we've pressured into the show, please don't tell people that we've pressured you into the show.
Thank you to our spouses and children for putting up with us. You guys rock.
Thank you, spouses and children. You do rock. Right on. Slam dunk. It's a wrap.
It's a wrap!
On our next ride in the station wagon, we're giving up complaining. Yeah, I just can't even believe we're going to do this, because this is part of our DNA, I think.
I know.
Right, totally. I mean, if you wanted to get, yeah, I have no idea where